Thanks everyone for joining. Please introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. We have guests coming from Europe today and from Ontario. Where I'm joining you from is Ravenwoods, which is where I live in British Columbia. And I would like to acknowledge that this is on the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, including the unceded territory of the Musqueam and the Squamish. And Hamish, where are you joining us from today?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Tessa. Hamish Kamis, the founder of Sparx Publishing Group. For those of you who don't know me already, I'm joining from the traditional and unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation.
Welcome to Purpose Connections, everyone. I know many of you, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tessa Vanderkop. I'm a collaborator at Purpose Pathways, where our purpose is to empower leaders and businesses to change the world. I'm also one of the co-founders of the Canadian Purpose Economy Project. Our vision is that by 2030, 25% of businesses in Canada will be purpose-driven, putting the well-being of people and planet at the center of their decision-making. I'm here today, though, as a collaborator and friend of Hamish and Alex from Sparx Publishing Group on Purpose Connections, which is a quarterly free online gathering of social purpose leaders, professionals, and advocates. And we really just believed that it was important to have a space where people, can come and learn and connect about topics directly related to building a purpose business or economy, as well as topics that are adjacent and feed into really creating that better world. And now I'd like to introduce you to Alex.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Nikitina. I'm a head of growth at Sparx Publishing Group. We're a full-service, purpose-driven marketing agency based in Vancouver. At Sparx, our purpose is to amplify voices that catalyze positive change. And we believe that marketing and communications can serve to accelerate awareness and adoption of solutions that promote long-term well-being for all. And that's why we're excited to work with Tessa to bring this fourth Purpose Connection session to life and to have two incredible thought leaders provide their perspectives on leveraging AI as a force for good.
In today's Purpose Connections, we're exploring the topic of purpose and AI transforming the economy. In our last session, we explored the topic of why purpose was a business model to not only help businesses navigate the challenges of our times, but also to meet today's moment and thrive and grow. But what does this look like, when we take a deeper dive into some of the big existential disruptors of our time? And it was interesting because I was talking to someone the other day and she said, I would just like to deal with one existential disruptor rather than multiple. But today we'll just talk about, it's like climate change and AI, and how can AI be leveraged as a force for good? And what does that look like on the ground? And how can businesses and business leaders leverage it? So we're really delighted to have two very distinguished guests with us today to help us navigate this topic and have this conversation. So Dr. Ron Dembo is a pivotal figure who translates complex risks into actionable financial strategies. As founder and CEO of Riskthinking.ai, he spearheads a critical mission, repricing global financial markets for climate change risks. Using patented multi-factor scenario modeling and an extensive database of worldwide corporate physical assets, Dr. Dembo is fundamentally reshaping market understanding for a sustainable future. Before Riskthinking.ai, he established Zero Footprint, an innovative tech firm focused on climate change. This deep commitment to environmental protection combined with his risk management expertise defines Riskthinking.ai's cutting-edge work. And I would also love to introduce Carlota de Paula Coelho. Carlota, I hope I said that correctly. Carlota works at the intersection of legislation, innovation, and ethical business. With a background spanning law, corporate sustainability, and technology, she brings legal and policy expertise to global ESG frameworks. As senior policy manager at B Lab Global, she leads international advocacy and standard-setting efforts that bridge sustainable finance, stakeholder governance, and systems change. She's a technical expert at EFRAG, GRI, and ISO, helping to align regulatory developments with sustainability practices across sectors and regions. Welcome, both of you, and thank you so much for taking the time to have this discussion. Over to you, Hamish.
Great, thank you, and welcome once again to everybody joining from all corners, and in particular our guest panelists who are joining us today. I'm going to just briefly set the scene and kind of speak to how we got here and why this topic, why now. It's a really fascinating conversation space around AI. Personally, my journey started 25 years ago. I did a degree at McGill in cognitive science and machine learning. And that's where AI was that long ago. We had always a view of something big could happen, but the timeline was very uncertain. And I think that probably dovetails quite nicely into some of the work that Ron does and his line of thinking is looking into the future, not knowing exactly what will happen when, but having a sense of things that could show up and provisioning for them. And so casting my own journey backwards, one of the things that was clear that long ago is that machines and people handle information differently. And certainly the principles that were true then are still governing much of what's going on today. And what's interesting about having both of these really interesting speakers here is that they can provide a lens on what has brought us all together as a community, which is purpose. And ideally understanding some of the limitations of the technology and how to leverage it or apply it in a way that enables us to achieve better outcomes or long-term well-being for all. So it'll have one part standards, I think, which is really important in governance. Another part, just technical understanding. And then it's marvelous to see the experts do their thing. So I will certainly dial back my commentary. I'm sort of in awe of the panel here and what we're aim to accomplish. But maybe just to level set a little bit around the definition of purpose, in particular social purpose, as contributing to the optimal strategic contribution to long-term well-being. And that's sort of the operational definition that we're working with. So without further ado, I'd love to sort of get into some of the context that I think a lot of people are feeling here, one of which is certainly grounded in some numbers, just for just for the narrative around how quickly AI has shown up in the lives of everybody here. It was just under 3 years ago where ChatGPT went live. So that was in November of 2022 moment. And it's, I think, the fastest software platform to reach 100 million users. It did it in, I think, 2 months, 2 or 3 months, and is now clocking in at about 800 million weekly users. And so and they're forecast to hit 1 billion users by the end of this year. So it gives you a sense of the speed and scale at which the shift has taken place. And I think that is the undercurrent that's really driving a lot of the uncertainty conversation space. And a lot of this is happening at a speed and scale that's sort of disrupting systems that have been in place. And there's a great tension point that I think we'll explore in the conversation, which is, a lot of the great thinking and a lot of these great models rely on, historical data. They take time to establish really sound process. They take collaboration. They take consultation, consensus building, but none of that is happening anymore. It seems like the rules are being written by business. And so I think that underscores the importance of the work that everybody who's committed to building a purpose-driven economy really sits. So with that sort of framing in mind, I want to kind of lead in with a question that we thought would be an interesting one to hear from you both, starting with Ron. So as we face sort of the confluence of crises from climate change to rising inequality, how do you think AI can be intentionally directed to support positive systemic change rather than reinforcing extractive models? And I think one of the things that you might be able to speak to more directly is how purpose-driven organizations could alter the range of possible future outcomes, since I know that's a place where you spend quite a bit of time.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. This is a profound question that you're asking, actually, because AI, like any transformative technology, amplifies the systems into which it's embedded. And this one is getting into systems very, very quickly. And the problem is it's pretty much a situation where these models are trained in a very crude fashion. They go out and gobble up everything known to man, whatever they can get their hands on. And they use AI in a very interesting way to actually form opinions and form conclusions from intersections of these models and all of this data. And the key in how they are formed to be able to address these issues is they need to be formed with intention, design, and governance. And really, today, there's not a lot of that, in my opinion. So AI can actually be used for very good purposes and very bad purposes, for nefarious actions as well. And it's guaranteed that that will happen. And it's probably, the challenge is the horse race is between how do we add in more of the good stuff and, not have too much of the bad stuff. So, for example, in banking, for example, you can imagine how AI could be used to improve greenwashing. You could greenwash a lot better with AI. In insurance, you could justify not insuring people or paying higher premiums with AI. Consumer goods, you could polish sustainability, essentially, you can do all sorts of things nefariously or well. And we've seen it. It's actually a fantastic technology. I use it a lot, and my company uses it a lot. In fact, there's a revolution in how people program today. They don't write programs. I mean, our programmers are not writing programs. What they do is they curate programs written by AI. So they give AI a challenge and say, I need this. It writes the program, and then the job is to curate it. But when you look at the literature, say in climate change, which is where I'm focused, you see a lot of stuff that is extremely poorly done from a scientific point of view. I saw an article this week in LinkedIn which received, gazillions of likes and whatever, and it showed a map of the world and what would happen to the GDP in every state and every location in the world. And so that's nice. It looks really interesting. The map's really pretty. But we have good climate scientists. So we dug right into how they did their work. And they essentially based the entire analysis on the fact that temperatures in the future will drive GDP change. And that's a fallacious assumption. We know it. For example, it ignores population. It ignores a lot of other things. And out come these beautiful looking results and, AI driven. And essentially, if you were to use that AI that was informed by this analysis, which, people actually praised. So AI might say, well, that's really good because there were 2,700 likes. And meanwhile, the people who didn't like it, the 3 people who didn't like it were right and that it was wrong. And so you imagine you're dealing with an assistant who grew up learning stuff that's not true. Well, that's not a good situation. So you can call that hallucination, but it's actually not hallucination. It worked out very well. It actually read something and didn't hallucinate. It was informed by it. So you can take a step back at a meta level, unless we put constraints on AI, that it needs to be informed by good science, by good ethics, and curated by good people, it's not going to be doing good purpose. And so not everybody's going to want to do that. There'll be a lot of businesses or banks or insurance companies who say, wow, I found this great tool and it can make my nefarious acts look really good. So, and all sorts of, you can imagine all sorts of fake stuff being done with AI. So, whereas we can't get rid of that, there'll always be such people. We can try and dominate that, and we can try and put guardrails around AI. But I think I'm very skeptical that we'd be able to put the right kind of guardrails around all AI to be able to create an AI that has purpose driven by good science.
Thanks, Ron. That's actually a great segue into, I think, a lot of the work that Carlota spends her time wrestling with. I also wanted maybe, so Carlota, if you could just sort of pick up on the work that you do, how AI is sort of shaping the landscape that you're operating in, and maybe sort of that tension point between, speed or time, right? Time is of the essence right now. But certainly it does take time to do things right and to do things well and thoughtfully. So to Ron's point, if we get that part wrong, then it just amplifies poorly in the wrong direction. So maybe just speak a little bit about your background and maybe pick up on that point about the work that you're doing and how it takes time.
Thanks again. I'm so pleased to be here. It's very healthy for me to speak to purpose-driven businesses because it means I can speak from the heart. I don't need to make a business case about why it's important to be committed to long-term well-being for all. And I work at B Lab. So that's an organization that's behind the B Corp certification, the B Corp movement. Hopefully some of you have heard about it. And I lead policy efforts, so collective action. Essentially, I try to amplify the voice of progressive businesses, civil society organizations, typically stakeholders that have less resources and who are a little bit less heard than industry, let's say. And I want to also try to weave it into my response about, how do we even begin to tackle AI from a policy standpoint, which I think is what you're asking, Hamish, considering time and the fact that, well, agility has never been the forte of a legislative processes. And potentially by the time you have a certain law, it will be outdated and the AI will have found holes. And then there's a fantastic question in the chats and who sets the guardrails to be a lead in a good way of integrating AI. I think that's also a really good point. Who is legitimate? Who's expert enough to even be making those calls? So our hypotheses, and I say our because I think some of you might be familiar with the work of Dr. Victoria Hirth, who's a thought leader in purpose-driven organizations governance. Our premise is that within our current system, so the economic and governance logics that always seek to maximize short-term financial profits, AI will inevitably reinforce existing extractive economic models. Inevitably, it will harm us. So it will be amplified. And we make the case that really the climate crisis or the poly crisis are also or begin with a governance crisis. Therefore, our, again, thesis is that it has to begin with first putting governance for long-term well-being for all at the center of the agenda. Looking at governing governance or regulating governance means looking at mechanisms for oversight and accountability. sounds a little bit boring, a little bit bureaucratic, but once we can agree and find a consensus on what is purpose-driven governance, and we mainstream it not just to AI developers and manufacturers and those that use AI, but to everybody, then we have a better chance at having purpose-driven AI developers and users. So we need to fix the system before we can actually address the AI problem. Once governments themselves become purpose-driven and have a way of governing for long-term well-being for all, we hope that then they can issue the right guidance, the right ethical guidelines or rules or soft law. They can create those feedback loops with the experts in the AI industry, reach out to the affected stakeholders to make the right rules. So that hopefully can address timeliness, because if we rely on the policy process as we know it, it won't work, because I work in laws regarding climate change and sustainability, and it's certainly not happening fast enough for the magnitude of the challenge. So imagine if we're trying to regulate AI, we will never find the right timeliness and agility. So I hope that answers the question and begins answering the question in the chat, which I find is also a bit of an elephant in the room. But who do we ask and who do we trust for ethical guidelines on AI?
That's a great point. I know. Well, I'll just turn it over to Tessa here to extend us into the next question, but just to add a beat onto it. It seems like, to your point, the rules are being written increasingly by businesses. The laws are written increasingly by businesses, and so, I'll just sort of do a little exercise. Airbnb, Uber, and now, courtesy of some lawsuits that have been settled this, past couple of weeks and months, Anthropic settling with some of the major sort of news outlets for copyright infringement and so forth. So increasingly, the calculus is laws exist, but technology and, go-to-market solutions are what will drive quote unquote progress. And so that presents the challenge writ large, as you mentioned it, Carlota. But I think there's also the opportunity for purpose-driven businesses to step into a different kind of game. With that, I'll hand it over to Tessa.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Liz's question in the chat, which is, I heard that EU ethics in AI policy is in development. Would you be able to speak to that at all, Carlota, or?
I can speak to the AI Acts if we're talking about the same law. And so it's a very good case study. It just came to birth after a very long pregnancy. I don't know if it's the correct word, and it's already under the attack. As you might have heard, globally, we're facing a bit of an executive overreach. In some countries, we call them executive orders. In other countries, we call them decrees. In the EU, we call them omnibus regulations. And they are basically, they're called simplification, but they're deregulating, legislative deregulation acts. To show you how quickly the market reacted. It's not even come into force yet. It's just passed. It's just been adopted, and it's already being threatened. And this is why I think that perhaps if we look at a corporate governance reform and try to tackle the issue from the roots, maybe the purpose-driven governance will have ripple effects or trickle down to any technology, any sector, and means we won't have to do this type of reactive lawmaking where we're taking a specific problem like AI, trying to regulate it, and then facing a backlash of the red tape boogeyman of people who don't really believe in regulation.
Okay, thanks, Carlota. So just, taking it from up here to down here a little bit, we have a lot of social purpose businesses, large and small, with us today. What advice do you have? Like, how does a purpose business, a business that is really committed to transparency and accountability. How do they navigate this world of AI, which is moving so quickly? And is there any practical advice that you would have on how they approach their decision making, or do you have any sense of what that could look like?
Especially because what I'm going to do will sound a little bit lazy, but I will again push back the responsibility of understanding how to navigate AI back on the purpose-driven organizations. You are, so you, the audience today, you are already in a much better place than a business as usual organization to be thinking about, ethical considerations, about affected stakeholders. You already have some mechanisms embedded in your governance and across your management practices to think about sustainability impacts. So when you hear that the use of AI is resource and water intensive, you hopefully already know how to consider that trade-off, to make the balance, to say, well, but it also increases the well-being of my workforce. They are a little bit less busy, they are more productive, they are happier. So you are accustomed to thinking about these trade-offs, and you have already mechanisms to open them to the consultation from your stakeholders, notably the employees, the workers, always the most important stakeholders. So I hope that Ron will come with something a little bit more concrete, because I think that I don't want to get too granular about sustainability practices or make any assumptions of what you already have embedded in your organizations, because that can vary a lot from size of companies to sectors to regions. If I took the example of due diligence, it might resonate with some of you and not others. But the point is, almost any of these practices can factor in AI considerations. And you've heard about CO2 footprints, you've heard about water footprints. If you have to have an economically viable business, which you do, you're already used to this balancing act. So, Ron, I'm passing this over to you, and I hope you have something a little bit more concrete than me just cheering for purpose-driven businesses.
Let me give you an analogy. So imagine it's 1904 and you're looking at cars just starting to appear. And that technology, you look at it and my boy, that'll really revolutionize the world. I mean, and it's not happening. Imagine now you've got a movie machine that allows you to squish time, and you see that unfolding very, very quickly at the same speed as AI. What you're going to see is people crashing into each other, people crashing into poles, people dying when the car rolls over. You're going to see people being thrown out. You're going to see all sorts of things because there aren't any traffic lights. There aren't any seatbelts. There aren't any laws. Anyone can drive. And you fast forward to today, you got to have airbags in your car. You got to have seat belts. There are traffic lights. There's fines. There's all sorts of things that guide you. And it's very, very similar to what's happening to AI. I mean, it's a very similar kind of thing. You've got a technology that's really revolutionizing our world. You will not, none of us and none of the people who work for you will be devoid of using AI. They'll be using AI whether they like it or not. It's kind of like, it's like trying to ignore the car today. So, so what do you do about that? Well, you can see what made the car, if you think of the number of miles traveled by car today versus the first few cars that came out, the number of accidents and things like that are minuscule compared to. Same with flying. Think of flying and how well we regulate planes and things like that and take care about how well we regulate the pilots that fly them. So just imagine that being applied to AI now. So we'll have our seatbelts, we'll have our, airbags, We'll have a government that will apply fines if we break the speed laws. You'll get your license taken away if you go through red lights too frequently, and so on. That's a lot of stuff, and it's very hard to make that stuff grow quickly. When you think of it, that being applied to cars and how much time people had to actually put those things in place, whereas in AI, between today and tomorrow, you're going to need 3 more regulations. And how's that going to happen at the speed at which things get regulated? So that's a big danger. And there's other things about AI that are challenging, and that is it's very, very very, very technology driven, and the differences in technology are humongous. So, for example, if you just go to, there are a lot of companies doing this now and saying, I'm going to use AI to predict what's going to happen to weather in 2050 in Singapore. Well, you can do it, but and it'll look good, and you can write a beautiful paper that says how you're going to do that, but it'll be based on fallacious logic. So what drives AI into not hallucinating is having models that it interacts with that have been vetted in some way by scientists. So, if you are using AI in that way and you're going to somehow push a button and out will come the temperature in Singapore in 2050, then it's almost guaranteed to be wrong. But if you're using it based on a model, and mathematical models can get very interesting from a purpose point of view. For example, in the models that we build that look at mortgages and the influence of climate risk on mortgages and on people's well-being, you see it's easy to take sociodemographic information and mix it with climate information and say, here are all the houses with the people who most can't afford a wet basement. And here's all your mortgages. So you, Mr. and Mrs. Bank, better do something about that and help those people. You don't need to help. There's a nice suburb here called Rosedale. You don't need to help those people, for those of you who know Toronto, because basement goes and you can redo it completely and you wouldn't even feel the difference. Same with Vancouver, and any other city. So, proper use of those models requires really good scientists. But that's not terribly different than proper use of aeroplanes requires people who really understand fluid dynamics and crazy stuff that requires a lot of mathematics. And the mathematics that's used to guide planes through turbulence is, pretty deep stuff. Partial differential equation, and stuff like that. You don't need to know that. All you need to know today is I get in the plane, and I'm pretty sure that the pilot's going to have to go through a whole bunch of checks before he or she takes off. I'm pretty sure that there's air traffic controllers, except in Newark, who really are, ready. But you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to have a flight and you're going to get to the other side. In the early days, that wasn't true. The first few jets blew up in the air. And that's what made Boeing famous. So one message I would give is don't think of AI as being able to predict your future or predict how much you're going to earn or predict whether something's going to be ethical. But you can use AI to prepare for that. So AI is a very, very good assistant. but it's whether it's ethical or, correct depends on who built it and who curated it. So just like having, the people who look after our water in cities and the people who look after our airplanes in flights, you're going to need experts and you'll only fly. I'm not going to fly, for example, in certain parts of the world because I know that their crash rate is extremely high. But I'd probably fly most North American airlines. So it's going to be kind of like that. Will you fly with ChatGPT or Gemini? Well, who do you trust? And how do we know who to trust?
I feel like I just by way of I have to disclose that I used to build airplanes. So my first job out of high school was working for Bombardier. So the layers of trust that you need to have are not just sort of who's controlling the things, but who's building the things. And I can't unsee what I've seen about that world. And so probably the kinds of things that people are building in the tech stacks now, right? Like who know the code intimately, who are just like really getting their hands dirty. They know sort of where the shortcuts are. And certainly, some of that stuff surfaces and then, things get course corrected. But I think the stakes, to your point, for businesses who get it wrong on behalf of what they're trying to serve in the market, are quite high. So Boeing has a job, like, arguably what's the one most important job of an airplane, right? And seatbelts are nice, but don't fall out of the sky, please, right? So like if at the end of the day, what is starting to take shape is a different narrative that's a bit more market driven. There is a counterforce, right? Which is if they get it wrong, if they fail to deliver on the promise of what the technology is, it doesn't really continue to grow. And within ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of these systems, if they're failing to deliver to the consumer or business user what the promise is, which is either make your life faster or give you accurate information, the counterforce is I just won't use it. I'll move on to something else. There's a great example coming back to your illustration about road safety and Waymo. I think they just published, every day something new comes out, which I think is another challenge just to stay on top of where things are at because it is so dynamic. But they published their road safety data and the approximate saving of lives by using sort of autonomous driving and reducing intersection crashes, for example, is compelling, right? Like you'd have to dig into, to your point, the actual calculation, the math. Is this claim valid? And be a bit more critical than accepting the numbers at face value. But it's compelling to see if you could save 30,000 lives a year through optimizing traffic patterns and flows. And that's that's a great segue, coming back to you, Ron, just in terms of the models, right? You spend a lot of time working with a lot of different kinds of modeling, and for businesses, small businesses may have just sort of like a narrow bandwidth. Larger businesses certainly can integrate much more sophisticated models. But how could businesses think about models that help them prepare for either long-term climate risks or ESG compliance in a way that benefits and maybe to Carlotta's point, to purpose, right? If those standards come through, could models be built around purpose in a way that benefits not just shareholders, but a broader set of stakeholders?
There's a lot of sayings about models and, funny and not so funny. But
Yeah.
the reality is the purpose of mathematical models is not numbers. It's the insight they give you. So models are all wrong in a sense because they are abstractions of the world, and the abstraction can easily be, you can easily poke holes in it. But do they give you the right insight? So, for example, if you're using a model to guide an autonomous vehicle, you don't believe that you have to, reduce speed to 47.326 kilometers an hour, but you do believe that if you see an unidentified object, you slow down. Do you know what I mean? So it's the insight that it gives you, not the number that came out of the model. And that's a very hard thing for people to get used to, although it's true, So in AI, it's the same thing. Is the AI giving me the right insight? And I'm not going to trust but do I even need to trust going to 4 decimal places? So, you don't care if someone gives you the temperature in Toronto next Tuesday is 24.37528 degrees. You say, well, it's like more than 20 and less than 30. It's okay. And if the AI is good at that, then you start to trust it. But the proof's in the pudding. And the problem is there hasn't been a pudding for very long. So we're going to see a lot of crashes.
We sort of started this with the comment, the greatest change to the means of production since the invention of electricity. When washing machines, which was sort of one of the first applications of the, things that technology could offer that would make people's lives feel better. Laundry is not something that most people have high on their list. But to your point, the electrical cords were a strangulation risk because washing machines would be bouncing around all over the place. And then, unfortunately, people would get tangled up in them. And so these kinds of, it's almost like we've seen this play out in a few different spaces before, but the stakes that might be, right now in front of us seem a lot higher. Seem like the magnitude of those things could be quite large. Carla, I'm wondering from your point of view, if you have a comment or two on how the folks who are thinking about modeling might integrate what you see as good principles for either governance, consensus building, and in particular, as it relates to bringing purpose into the abstraction.
There's a lot to unpack here because there's a lot of topics that came in the past 10 minutes that I thought I wanted to react to.
Oh, please, yeah, go ahead to those because there's lots of itches that we wish we could scratch. But please start with
right.
Yeah,
and I guess the Ron's point about we can simply take the responsibility of understanding what is safe and what isn't, and then the fact that you brought Boeing, I thought, okay. First, we can't always shift the responsibility back to us, the individual, to be making these choices. I mean, yes, that's the world we live in, and I do work for B Lab, who does believe in the whole movement of voting with your wallet. As consumers, we do have a footprint on market trends. But then you mentioned Boeing, and I thought, well, what a fantastic example of shareholder primacy. So it's not anymore about customer safety. No, it's about stocks repurchasing and halting innovation, as long as it brings maximum profit to the shareholders. So I keep going back to the original sentiment, which is we can try to piecemeal standards and modeling techniques, and we should try. But we still, if we don't start by naming the root problem, we're not going to get there. So modeling, that's one step nearer, let's say, the tactical. It's not as meta as to rethink corporate governance, and I know it has very practical implications. I'm not sure what they would look like. I'm a lobbyist. What I'm sure is that I want people like us to have a voice in the room when it happens. I want transparency around the process. I don't necessarily think that it'd be meaningful to have these conversations behind closed doors in Silicon Valley without knowing what's happening. I think AI can help us as well, elevating those voices, because if most of us have faced resource constraints that we don't necessarily have the time to produce the right documents that are typically expected in a consultation, well, that problem is solved for us. It's not enough. It doesn't fully tip the scales, but it's something. So I'm wondering if for modeling for AI, can we use AI? Can we use, as different data points, what affected stakeholders and expert stakeholders data, but good data, the one you were talking about, Ron, not fallacious data. I think that is where my mind goes. It's again missing the question and answering the question prior to that. So what would the process would even look like?
Well, you can use AI to police AI, and that's being done. But I thought I thought it would be fun to use AI to answer some of the questions that you were going to pose to us. So I wanted to read you the answers from AI to some of the questions you posed to us.
Oh, okay.
Would you like that?
Yeah.
So the question that you haven't asked us yet said, if you could leave business leaders with one guiding principle for using AI to build a more purpose-driven and resilient future, what would it be? So if I were answering that, with, my academic hat on, I'd say you got to put people and planet at the center. And unlike traditional approaches, which are constrained by scale, bias, or limited foresight, AI can process vast and complex data and patterns and risks and that humans might miss. And when directed with purpose, it becomes not just a tool for efficiency, but a force for building resilient systems that prioritize human well-being. That's the academic answer. The answer from NAI is think of AI as a compass. It won't erase uncertainty, but it will point us towards resilience and purpose. I thought that was very nice. Pretty good, better than mine. AI guided by science and ethics can turn risk into resilience and purpose into prosperity. Also nice. And AI is the most powerful when it serves not just shareholders, but all stakeholders, people, planet, and future generations. So that was AI answering your AI question. I wonder if you found it useful. But I actually have 10 pages of it here. In fact, I even have a table of AI versus benefits versus nefarious uses. And it's exceptionally good. I mean, the interesting thing about AI as a technology, which makes it quite unique, is AI can police AI and AI can generate AI. And AI can find mistakes in AI.
Carlota, I can see you.
I have to speak about OpenAI. I don't know if that came from ChatGPT, but I do want to point out that project was started as not for profit, right? And something happened. Market forces, investor pressure, commercial pressure, geopolitical rivalry, you name it. And they got pulled back into short term.
There's a nefarious little story behind that. And this happens to be a unique thing in North America, in the US, not in Canada, not in many places. And that is you can start a company as a not-for-profit. And when it's successful, you can suddenly turn it into a for-profit with no penalties.
So, where I'm from as well, in Spain as well, you can do that.
Well, it's a scam. In a sense, you started as a not-for-profit. Everyone thinks you're doing stuff for purpose and good. So they fund you, and then you quickly turn it into, a nefarious little tool.
Oof. Well, I've known a lot of purpose-driven organizations that started as NGOs and then wanted to evolve towards a company for different reasons. And this is why B Lab, my organization, we've been advocating for this. I don't know if you know this benefit corporation law. So that's a specific, okay, to acknowledge that these businesses exist and they need to be able to have a bit adjusted fiduciary duties towards, well, stakeholders beyond shareholders. You make a very good point, but I still think that it is, again, such a good case study for, and I've spoken to ChatGPT themselves about this issue of, but the intent was there and you got pulled back into shareholder primacy logics.
The intent might have been in the few people who joined it who thought that that was truly the purpose. But I believe that the people who thought it, who were really behind it, were there to make money. So anyway, the point is, not all things are bad. They could start out as a not-for-profit and turn into a very good purpose company, and it can do the reverse. If you think of Patagonia, start off as a for-profit and turn into for-profit for purpose. So there's all shapes and sizes, but the point is that that's not a good example of, they started out with purpose, because I'm not sure that's true.
I have one quick last, there's a question in the chat and we are so quickly running out of time. We should have scheduled this for a lot longer. There's so much to unpack, but here's one. How might social purpose companies leverage AI to implement and collaborate on their purpose? How can it be a tool to accelerate progress on their purpose?
I'm a firm believer that AI for purpose companies can really accelerate the purpose itself. So, and that can, just like it can accelerate many things. I mean, the leverage it gives in writing, in examining tremendous amounts of data, is enormous. So, take the B Corp. It's a company that truly does have purpose, and I've met it in its earliest inception at a TED conference in Vancouver, and it's a wonderful company, and it's continued to be a wonderful company and done a lot of good. But I'm pretty sure that AI can actually accelerate it. So there's probably many examples you could think of.
Carlota, any quick last thoughts on your part? This wasn't how we were supposed to wrap up, but there's so many questions in the chat. So
I think AI can help with the most tenuous, operational, easy, automatable tasks, and then we can leave the purpose to the real human beings behind that have it in their hearts. So I do agree with Ron. I think we're not in opposite sides here. I think there sometimes the AI has a creative way of thinking, and maybe hallucinations are not all bad in that sense. But what I see in my job is that it frees up time for things that, well, I don't really want to be doing, so that I can have a bit more time for contemplative reflections and strategize.
I would summarize it, Carlota, in the following. You can use AI to do a lot of stuff, even strategize for you. And you are the curators of that AI. And that's where the good stuff happens, is that it frees you up. You're not the writer, you're now the editor. And if you get into that mindset, use AI a lot, but curate it well.
Right. On that note, thanks to all our guests and attendees. I know we're getting pretty close to time. So Tessa, I'm not sure if you want to wrap us up here, and then Alex, if we need to close out.
yeah, well, thank you, Ron and Carlota, for having this conversation. I think it's a really important one to have. Ron, I think when you were talking about the aircraft industry and cars, I think, as human beings, we've been here before. right? And I think it's definitely that scary moment, I think, for a lot of people. And I think, Carlotta, I think it's really interesting because I feel like there's your work, and I think some of the things that you've talked about is very heart-centered, in spite of all of the regulations and frameworks and those kinds of things. So there's lots of food for thought here. Definitely. So thanks everyone. We are Purpose Connections. We host these kinds of conversations. I could say more, but I can't because time is over. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to join us. I really appreciate it.
One quick closing note, just as
Okay, here we go.
housekeeping, sorry, is that Purpose in Business Week is coming up in November, November 17th to 21st. So hashtag Purpose in Business Week. And we'll be sending out the video. Thanks to everybody who joined. We'll collect the questions. We'll see what we can do to try and not hand them over to AI to answer them on your behalf. See if we can maybe convince Ron to share some of his notes as well as the director's cut. This is a fascinating conversation. Thank you, everybody. I'm so excited. It took 25 years to get here, but oh boy, I'm ready for the next 25 because it's going to be wild. All right.
Yeah,
Thanks, everybody.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.